You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. I hope you are all doing very well. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. Unbelievably, this is our 17th episode. I've really enjoyed doing this, particularly because of the people that I've been fortunate enough to have on the show. It's amazing to have these folks offer their expertise and opinions on our platform. Needless to say, we are very, very grateful. As you all have heard me say over and over again, we would not be where we are today without each other, our families, friends, colleagues, and support, which came in many, many ways. The mentorship, particularly that we receive from different people, has been critical. I mean, that's really been one of the most important parts of our development. So we thought it'd be interesting to have a discussion about this with two retired FBI agents that share a special bond, James Tierney and Joseph Marasco. First, thank you for joining us today. How are you, Jim?
I'm great, Farhad. Thank you for setting this podcast up and inviting us.
Absolutely. I'm looking.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's certainly great to catch up with my good friend and former colleague, Joe Marasco. I was Joe's supervisor in the New York office of the FBI early in his career.
Yep. No, we're excited to have you both. And Joe, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you, Forhad, and welcome. Thank you for having me and for the opportunity to be here with you today, along with my former colleague, longtime mentor, and good friend, Jim Tierney.
Excellent. Well, just to help break the ice a little bit, we always talk with our guests before we hop on the show, and almost always everyone says, we don't do this all the time. This is our first time, all that kind of stuff. And what I always say to everyone is, we don't either. And so just be yourself, and I'm sure everyone's going to get great value out of that. So thank you again for both being here. As our audience knows, all of the guests that we've had on the show are people that we have both a personal and professional relationship with. Jim Tierney is someone that fits into both of those categories for me personally. He's a colleague, he's a friend, and again, going back to being a mentor, he's been a great mentor to me. We first met at Guardsmark over 20 years ago when I joined shortly after finishing school, and he retired from the FBI and joined the company. We've had a great bond ever since, and I can literally go on and on about him, our relationship, our friendship, but let me let Jim speak. Could you, Jim, talk a little bit about your background?
Sure, Farhad. I grew up in New York City, where I attended local parochial schools. Came from a large family. I have 5 siblings. My family was an FBI family. My dad was an FBI agent in the 1940s, 1950s, and well into the 1960s. He was an agent for over 25 years. He served most of his career in New York, and he was what we called back in the day a Cold Warrior. He worked against the Russians, who had a large presence in New York City. They had a consulate and a mission to the United Nations, and they had operatives that were working against the interests of the United States right here in New York City. My dad worked some of the more famous cases back then in the early 50s. He worked the Rosenberg espionage case, and he was the case agent on a lesser known case called William Walter Remington, who was a government employee. He worked in the Commerce Department in New York and in DC. During World War II, he passed secrets, top secrets, to the Russians on U.S. war production. My dad was on what they called back in the day the Internal Security Division, and that case fell in his lap. He was a lawyer, and it went to federal court, where he obtained a couple of convictions, certainly doing his part and the defense of U.S. interests back in those days. The Internal Security Division is the forerunner of what I came onto in the 70s, the Foreign Counterintelligence Division, or FCI. Because of my dad's background in internal security, I thought I might want to do something similar when I came into the Bureau. And I'll just say parenthetically, as most people know, the Bureau has, two main interests in terms of what it does and what it attempts to counter. There's a criminal division and there's a foreign counterintelligence division. That's the way it was when I came in. Of course, now there's several other divisions. There's cyber, there's national security, and there's counterterrorism. So the Bureau evolves, and as my dad's career evolved into mine sort of evolved into Joe's, and I'll let Joe take it from there.
Well, that's really interesting. So is I guess the interest in joining the FBI, was that from your dad, from your family, or was there other motivation in terms of why you ended up following your dad's path?
There probably is, Farhad, but I think primarily it was my dad being an FBI agent. He would take me to the office. When I was in scouting, he would have some of the troops come up. I was always involved. We got to go to the indoor firearms range. I saw what he did. We got a tour of the office. So I always had an interest. I also have an interest in the law, but working for the FBI was primarily fostered by my dad having been an agent. So that's basically why I joined, and that's it, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, that's really interesting. And you are the only sibling that went into the FBI, correct?
Yes, we're all professionals, I would say. I have a brother, older brother is a CPA, and my other brother was a banker. He had an MBA from Rutgers, and he went into private industry. He worked at Goldman Sachs for 25 years. It's interesting, when our families would get together, we at picnics and barbecues and graduations and so forth, the conversation almost always was around what I was doing as an FBI agent.
I can see that.
And very little on the banking industry or what accountants do. They're all important professions, but I think there was a recognition in my family that the family business was what the FBI does.
That's great. Yeah, and I could definitely see that. So Joe, maybe you could talk a little bit about your background and your life at the Bureau, what you're doing now, and just kind of go from there.
Certainly, Farhad. I grew up in the outskirts of Philadelphia in a town called Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. Very humble beginnings. I'm number 3 out of 6 kids. One girl and 5 boys. I am the first one out of my siblings to graduate college. I went to Kutztown University, where I double majored in marketing and management. However, I pursued a career right out of college with the Vanguard Group of investment companies, where I did financial advising and stocks and bonds. When I was in finance, I absolutely loved it. However, my older brother was with the Pennsylvania State Police for a number of years, and it was always very entertaining at family gatherings to hear the stories of what he encountered in the state police. So I started an interest in law enforcement. However, I wanted to use my degree and pursue something along the federal law enforcement realm. So I started looking at all the different federal agencies, and I started ruling them out one by one, just based on my personal experiences of what I found. And I started to gravitate more and more towards the FBI, mainly because of the people that I met. They tend to be not just very friendly, but took the most time to walk me through the process, explain what the Bureau was, what I might encounter, the different divisions that I could pursue if selected. So fortunately for me, the Bureau did select me and appointed me a position. So Because of my background in finance, I had really hoped and expected to work something in the securities fraud realm. But instead, the Bureau had other plans for me, and they had sent me to what Jim described as an FCI squad, a Foreign Counterintelligence Squad. I was not too happy at first because I really wanted to kick down doors and kind of pursue something where I can jump in with at least one foot while I was learning the law enforcement aspects of it. Several of the senior agents that I had spoken to over my first 6 months in the Bureau had told me to remain open-minded, that they had worked criminal in the past. Their path also took them to counterintelligence matters, and they were lifers in counterintelligence. So I did just that. I remained open-minded. And Farhad, that open-mindedness, literally from day one on the Counterintelligence Squad, which is where I met Jim Tierney, it was actually the start of my career in counterintelligence. 23 and a half years later, rising to the ranks of the senior executive service in the counterintelligence in the FBI division. Even though I had ample opportunity to work other matters, I remained true to counterintelligence because of the start that I had on my first squad with Jim Tierney as a senior agent, and the mentorship and friendship that he provided since that point.
So your first office was New York?
Correct.
Okay. So the so you report, and Jim, maybe you could walk us through. I don't know if Joe's ever heard your side of it, and I don't know how much you remember about the details about it, but about the beginning of the relationship, his first day or his early days. Can you talk about that a little bit and talk about the relationship as it developed over the years?
Sure. I was Joe's supervisor and rating official late in my career, and it was very early in his career. And I was very sensitive to that he was a newcomer, and that with his background in private industry, he may want to work criminal work rather than foreign counterintelligence or FCI. But I saw something in him almost immediately. I noted his appearance. It was excellent. I was grateful that he had private sector experience, after college. He'd been out in the real world. And I found almost immediately that he was eager to learn, and he wasn't putting up any barriers to being a career FCI agent, which told me something, that there was a willingness to do the work. And we like to say in the world of FCI that, as opposed to the criminal side, that we're playing a game of chess. It's a thinking man's game. And on the criminal division side, they're playing checkers. There's more thinking on our side, and the cases tend to develop more slowly. Sometimes you don't have that success that you have in the criminal division, with an arrest and a trial and bad guys going to jail. On the FCI division, we're trying to counter the activities of hostile intelligence services. Think Russians, think Chinese, today Iranians. These are people who are not friendly in their interests towards the United States. And the FBI counters that. And it's sometimes difficult developing informants and assets and things that we use, the techniques that we use to counter their activities. But Joe showed an aptitude, particularly for informant development, which is unusual in a young agent. In the FCI division, we call it asset development. And I gave Joe particular attention because I thought I had a good shot at bringing him along. And to hear him say, that he spent his career on the FCI division and rose up to the ranks down in DC at headquarters, senior executive service, it really makes me feel good that I was able to reach out, touch someone, and guide their career as a friend, as a mentor, as a supervisor. And even as he moved into private industry, our relationship continued. So this was a 20-year plus relationship. And I'm so grateful to be able to catch up with him and hear his side of things. It's very helpful to me as an individual, a retired FBI agent, and someone who took an interest in his career.
Yeah. So what do you think when you hear about that, Joe?
So it brings back a lot of memories, Farhad. I would say what I was expecting when I was coming to New York to be on my first squad. I was a little concerned about getting on that first squad because even going back to the Quantico days, and we spent 5 months at Quantico in training. Everybody had cautioned us about getting sent to New York and then cautioned us about at least getting to the first squad because all of the senior agents would take everything that you had. We were issued laptops. They said they're going to take your laptop, they're going to take your flashlights and everything you got because they never got those experiences. When I got to my first squad, where again Jim Tierney was my supervisor, it was 180-degree difference from what I was anticipating. Jim and two of the other senior agents that were on that squad were getting ready to retire in a few years, as Jim had explained, and they could not have done enough to teach me the craft, to allow his legacy to essentially live on. Jim gave me opportunities that I think really set my career in motion in counterintelligence. Jim had mentioned source handling, and really just extremely sensitive recruitment operations that as a relatively new agent never would have come my way. And I think some of the executive managers were even a little cautious about me taking the reins. And Jim really went to bat for me, that I was the right guy to accomplish this mission. And as it turned out, it was this one particular case that was handed my way was extremely successful. So when I reflect on what I did over my 23-year career and the impact that it made globally, it all started with that first 3 years with Jim Tierney. Like Jim said, really 23 plus years of friendship and mentorship really has changed the scales of U.S. capabilities and the things that we did in the last 23 years.
Sure. No, I mean that's really incredible to hear about. And one of the things about like the discussion, I think that's important here. That's again, we'll talk about takeaways and things like that. And I see this on the private side, as you guys know. I've been pretty much on the private side. There's really two aspects to this, right? It's the mentor taking an interest in the person and having an interest in their career, their development, all that sort of stuff. And then the mentee, the person being mentored, also has to have an interest, also has to have an aptitude, also has to have a desire to, take advantage and capitalize on the fact that someone is taking interest in them. And obviously in this scenario, everything hit on all cylinders. But I think it's important to people listening out there, and I'd love for you guys to comment about this, because you talk about, really, I think it's amazing that you're citing those first 3 years and that development during those first 3 years, how that had a global impact on what we as a country did for for FCI operations. And so I think the point about both the mentor and mentee being interested, involved, and all that sort of stuff, I think that's important to people in those roles today, to see something that evolved over 20 plus years that had an impact, and how each of those relationships could lead to that same kind of impact. And then you combine all those things and how much of a difference it could make, as a cumulative impact. What do you guys think about that? Maybe Jim, you could start, and Joe, you can follow up on that.
Well, I noticed that around the time that Joe was coming on to the FCI division, that many of my colleagues who had mentored me had already retired. and I was conscious, and the front office in New York, they looked to me as basically the institutional memory. We sometimes call it the tribal memory of why we do certain things in a certain field, why the FBI takes an interest, why the FBI puts resources into accomplishing certain things. And I guess, I was the guy. And I was very conscious, with my dad having been an agent and knowing that agents had trained me and took an interest in my career, that Joe could be someone worthy of passing that legacy along. And I'm very grateful that his remarks today were spot on. And I agree with, the feeling that you mentioned, Farhad, in both the public sector and the private sector. Mentorship, is extremely important. It's something of a cliche to find a mentor. The thing is, it's not always easy. I mean, there isn't always formal structure that says, this person will be a mentor, or that person will be a mentor. Sometimes the newcomer has to seek out a mentor, and sometimes the relationship takes and sometimes it doesn't. But if both sides are willing to work, and if both sides have a sense of mission, we can accomplish it together. And it certainly served me well too when I moved into private industry after I retired.
Yeah, Joe, any follow-up on that, or?
Yeah, Farhad, I would say that, prior to me joining the FBI, I was in finance for approximately six and a half years. And while I had some very high level contacts within that organization or even within the finance industry, I did not have a mentor. And to be honest, I didn't even really fully understand. There was no talk of mentors. And if there was, I really didn't know where to go to seek out a mentor. But being a high level contact and being a mentor are two very stark differences.
Sure.
So when I talk about mentorship, I have this personal experience to capitalize on from really day one on my first squad in my first office in the FBI. And that's why I say it really made an impact on me that really changed the scope of who I was during my 23 and a half year career, because not only did I continue to seek mentorship, seek additional mentors throughout my career, but I paid it forward, and I wanted to be that mentor for others in the organization, those that worked for me, with me, and even those that showed an interest in the FBI, because I knew, just like Jim, I want and am going to need to replace myself, and I want to replace myself with another high caliber individual that I think will be able to accomplish even some of the things that I did in my career.
That's just such, I mean, again, it's such a brilliant point, and such a, the show, as you know, is called Investigation Insiders, right? So what we're trying to do is peel back the layers on different things related to investigations, related to cases, related to all those kind of things, right? And most of the times what we're talking about, and when we're peeling back the layers, it's somewhat obvious in terms of where we're going with it. And I think this is a little bit more of a complex topic that really is beyond, conducting interviews, developing sources, conducting background checks, looking at computers, looking at emails, things like that. This has to do with almost like a lifestyle, a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? A culture of not only growing yourself, but helping those around you grow, and how important that is to investigations. And this is true on, again, I imagine, even though I didn't work on the public side, but also the private side is that development, that interest, and how that impacts the quality of investigations, because when you develop that culture, that mindset of excellence, it has an exponential impact. And so I just think that's such a great point that you both make. And really, that's one of the real focuses of this particular episode, is to highlight that for anyone listening, whether it's someone seasoned that has the opportunity to be a mentor, or someone new that is starting out in their career and is thinking about, what can I do? Well, one of the things that you can do is be like Joe and say, you know what, I'm eager to learn. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to adapt. I'm willing to change. I'm willing to do the things that I'm asked to do. And also be like Jim and saying, okay, well, here's someone that's checks off all those boxes. It would be worth that time, because that impact may, just like with Joe, last for 20 plus years. And then, as you mentioned, Joe, also impact others, because you paid it forward, and hopefully those folks will pay it forward, and things just continue to move forward. So really, really great points by both of you. I guess I want to move on to sort of like an anecdotal sort of discussion, because this is the 20th anniversary this year of September 11th. And I know you were working FCI, and again, Jim left the Bureau shortly before 9/11, and you were obviously working FCI at the time. And so I think it'd be interesting to talk about, kind of, Joe, what your role was to the extent that you could discuss it, and how that mentorship and all the impact that the first few years of your career spending with Jim and others on your squad, how that sort of culminated into what you were doing at that time and what impact it had. So I'd pass it on to you to talk about that a little bit.
All right, thank you, Farhad. Certainly, yes, a lot of emotions that always surround this part of my career. So I was on the Counterintelligence Squad. We were on the 25th floor at the southwest corner of the building that faced the Twin Towers. I was actually working an early shift, the 6 to 2 shift that day, so I was in early. And so I was there for the striking of the first plane into the North Tower. And while everybody was trying to figure out, was it an accident or was it intentional? It wasn't until the second plane hit where we kind of automatically assumed that it was terrorism at that point. So even though we worked counterintelligence matters, it still all fell under the national security umbrella. That was the days prior to counterintelligence and terrorism being split into their own separate divisions. But the events of 9/11 really were far beyond my expectations of what I thought I would be encountering in the FBI. I initially thought I would be working securities fraud, breaking down doors, and then recruiting spies. Never did I ever think I would encounter something like this. And I did wind up at the base of the North Tower when the South Tower came down. But there were 3 instances on that day where I actually thought I would not make it out of Lower Manhattan alive. And that was getting out of the federal building, thinking that our building would be a target and it would be next to be hit. Standing at the base of the North Tower when the rumble of the South Tower started coming down. My thought initially was that the subways were all bombed, that I was just going to fall into the subways and no one would ever know what happened to me. And then running from the South Tower, my initial thoughts were that the tower was just going to fall, kind of leaning wise, and it would just fall on top of me no matter how fast I would be able to run. But a couple of the takeaways from there, Farhad, and I think what got me through that as well was that reach back to Jim, even though he had retired. Jim had been in the Bureau 20 years plus, and we had developed that bond that, within the days following, that was one of the first calls that I made. And how that relationship and mentorship prepared me for that, I would say there were three main takeaways. The first and foremost, which was taking care of my people, my squad mates, those colleagues that I worked with. We had a professional support employee that was there that morning who had severe physical disabilities. And he was always the individual that would say, "Oh, we'll just meet you there. I'll meet you there." My first priority was getting him out of that building so that he could get to safety. The secondly was the passion for the work in national security. Initially this might seem very minor, but securing documents and locking those in the safe before we got out of the building, because there was a lot of sensitive work that was being done. And if we didn't secure those documents, then everything we had done up to that point could have been compromised. But again, because we were all under the national security umbrella, we were all essentially working terror matters from that point on. And then the leadership. I reached out to the front office that morning. The front office wasn't in yet. When I was able to get to safety and actually able to get some phone lines through, which wasn't until approximately 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I reached out to all of my squad members for accountability to make sure that they were okay and what their plans were. And then after the first 3 days, when we finally had some semblance of what we would be doing as a squad, I assumed responsibility on my own for the night shift, which was 12 midnight to 12 noon, to ensure that that everybody had some type of direction. And again, this was all through my mentorship with Jim. Just on where to go with such a horrendous event that just transpired.
Sure. Jim, what goes through your head when you hear about all that?
Well, it's not something that I think about, but because of the podcast and because we are thinking about these things and remembering, having passed that legacy across to Joe, it actually gives me a glow as I'm speaking. It's a warm feeling of thanks. And if I had some part in motivating Joe, mentoring Joe, instilling him the qualities that we've clearly heard him express during his career and during the events of 9/11, I feel like I did my job. It's humbling and it's exciting. I'm grateful, and I know that Joe did the same things along his career, both in New York and at headquarters. He was in some other field offices as well. I know that he took mentoring and legacy matters very seriously, and hearing his story on 9/11, underscores the importance of having mentors and passing along why we do things. Joe, I tip my hat to you for what you accomplished in the aftermath of 9/11. You thought of our people, you thought of our work, and you thought of being a leader. As a mentor, I couldn't ask for more. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it really is fantastic. And one of the things perhaps we can sort of lead into the takeaways about our discussion here today is, one of certainly my hopes is that, people listen to this, and even if we could impact a handful of people that say, what, that's really interesting, and that's a true real life anecdote about what kind of impact we all could make on both sides, being a mentor, being a mentee, and how much of an exponential impact it could have. I hope that people take that away, and hopefully we hear back from some people that said, what, we listened to the episode, found it very interesting, and that is going on in my life, that is going on in my career. And obviously we're talking about law enforcement, private security, but really is applicable just about anywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. So takeaways. What sort of? I'll start with you, Jim, and then go to you, Joe, about takeaways that you all. I just kind of went through mine, but what takeaways would you highlight for our audience if they were going to walk away with one or two important sort of points from this episode?
Well, I'll just say briefly, Joe mentioned something, in private industry and even in the Bureau, there's no manual or guidebook in the general discussion of being a mentor, finding a mentor, mentorship in general. I mean, it gets talked about and so forth, but, I think in today's world, we all understand that learning the culture of organizations, it goes beyond, the formal structure. You need the informal structure, the hand that's reached out, the hand that's accepted, looking out for someone's career, being a sounding board. These are things on the informal side of any organization which make a difference. And I think the example, of myself and Joe is very clear. I mean, it's how it works. It doesn't always work. Some people resist being a mentor. Some people resist being a mentee. But it works for the organization and it works for the individuals. I can't say enough about my relationship with Joe. It's beyond mentorship. It's friendship. It's professional courtesy. It's how we accomplish a mission. So I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. I'm grateful I met Joe, and I'm grateful I had such an impact on his career.
Awesome. Yeah. How about you, Joe? What takeaways would you have for our audience if they were going to walk away with one or two key points here?
Yeah, Farhad, I would say just the power of mentors in all aspects of your life. Jim Tierney's advice went far beyond just the Bureau, but it transitioned to retirement as I was looking closer to retirement, but even personal reasons. And, if you have some negativity in your personal life, it certainly affects your work balance. And if there's negativity at work, stressful situations, it affects your personal life. So, finding that right mentor, and I don't know if, again, it was just a very, the way our relationship came together was just very fluid and natural. And I'm also very fortunate for that because I truly don't believe that I could have accomplished everything that I did in my career without Jim's assistance along the way. Jim has always portrayed that leadership, collaboration, professionalism, and of course the subject matter expertise in his craft. But working with other agencies, Jim taught me about, even other agencies with competing interests. We have to get along. And that is something that I also passed along to those that I mentored that may have been frustrated after even one encounter with another agency. And I think I did a good job in helping people see through that. The paying it forward is absolutely essential. And then last but certainly not least is that because of the relationship that Jim and I had developed, I certainly did not want to disappoint. And that was a huge motivator as well. So I too am very fortunate to have met Jim early in my career, and it's just been a great friendship has developed, and I am just very thankful to you as well, Jim. Thank you.
I mean, it's just such a great case study of two people. Again, really fortunate for us to be able to kind of let you guys speak about this on our platform. So thank you both for allowing that. Obviously, Jim and I also have a separate relationship, and I've been the beneficiary of similar goodwill on his part. So Jim, thank you for everything you've done for me over the years as well. And I'm grateful that again, we're friends many years later, and that we talk regularly and just collaborate on different things. So thank you. And Joe, obviously this is our relationship is is new, but look forward to continuing to speak and collaborate and do things together. And I appreciate you both being on the show. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. Please continue to send your comments to info@integrusintel.com. We'll put links to both Jim and Joe's LinkedIn pages in the description of the podcast. Jim and Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Farhad. Thank you, Jim.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.